how police forces should be. So that we think the police forces should have the distance to the interest of the incident to ensure the proper action by mutually respect the rights of the criminal and the rights of the target or the rights of the victim. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, we've already analyzed the characteristic as to how actually the vigilant is not good actor, rather toxic actor to ensure the security on the macroscopic level. That's why they aren't a suitable actor to be a vigilant. Ladies and gentlemen, for all those reasons, we are very proud to oppose. Mr. Yonezawa, what they have proven today is the harm of vigilantism in general. We consider they may have toxic incentive and community might have internal corruption, but that's happening in the status quo already. The only solution to deal with already pre-existing internal corruption and harm intrinsic and endemic to the nature of vigilantes is to legally enable them to work together with the police institution and the administration to collectively crack down illegal poaching in a larger scale, quantitatively and qualitatively. And that's the distinction between their side of the house and this side of the house. Hereby, they spent about 7 minutes talking about the harm of vigilantism in general, which is not relevant to the debate in the first place. That's what we have to clarify right from the start. Moving on to the rebuttals. Number one, the deputy explained the quality of information. They questioned how to gain those information. The current vigilantes already, working in order to crack down themselves outside the legal framework. They have already accumulated some sort of experiences and information about their enemies. Then we can utilize those evidences under our paradigm because police can also analyze those evidences. Second of all, they say under their paradigm they can have a big data, right? In their rebuttal B, but this kind of big data will be more efficiently utilized under our paradigm because the quality of information that all ordinary civilians have and the already pre-existing vision they have is largely different. Therefore, we can use both information from all ordinary civilians and the pre-existing vigilance illegally in the status quo. Therefore, we can efficiently improve the quality of big data the police institutions have. Second of all, they say, police have proper incentive, right, in order to crack down these things. 3 rebuttals. Number one, the nature of resources is zero-sum. Let me analyze the allocation of zero-sum resources. The resources have a propensity to be prioritized or allocated to urban area with more political will, right? It's fundamentally or structurally or democratically impossible for the administration to allocate the resources to remote areas. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, consider the geographical structure of the African continent. Second of all, right, in the status quo, police is fighting against both illegal vigilantes and illegal poachers, right? Therefore, resources is fundamentally wasted in the status quo, to which we can more efficiently invest into fighting only illegal poachers. Not the differences in terms of allocation of resources. Number 3, incentive is different from ability. Even if under their side of the house, police have fundamental political incentive to crack down illegal poachers, which is different from actual ability or capacity to do so. That's why we believe, we expect proxy role, complementarity by this civilian organization in like other cases like a social capital, right? These like family or friends or civilians are playing the proxy role the state cannot really provide for. What we are talking about is an urgency, right? In an urgent situation, the illegal poachers are killing your elephants, your animals, your chimpanzees. It's urgent. How is it possible to call the police and wait for 30 minutes for the police coming, right? When police, comes, the poachers go away somewhere, right? We are talking about the context of emergency. More than why it's emergency is important because you also need to have your self-defense rights, right? The structural, physical, military power imbalances between criminal organization and the personnel working in a national park, like my friend, right? Therefore, we should, consider that. Second of all, about the issue of criminal rights, right? Criminal rights should also be respected to some extent. Number one, how under your side of the house can you respect criminal rights accountably, right? Because their fundamental premise is that they can accountably arrest these people, right? For example, even in the status quo, in an urgent case, police might shoot these criminal poachers in the status quo, right? Therefore, we cannot guarantee perfect respect for criminals' rights. The number two, it's sometimes legitimate to create a hierarchy among human rights. For example, the terrorists or suspected terrorists are subject to enhanced interrogation or even tortures in some times. When these criminal personnel or criminal individuals are creating the fundamental irrevocable threat upon society, we need to compromise to some extent the rights of these organizations and prioritize the rights of victims, Mr. Speaker. Defenseless victims who have no physical capacity or accountability or ability to defend themselves from the use of weaponry the criminal organizations have. Thereby, even if we concede to some extent we have to respect for fundamental human rights, we need to create a hierarchy between the rights of defenseless victims and those who are actively attacking these people. Because these illegal poachers consented that, to be, prosecuted. This organization knows that it's illegal in the first place. They knowingly break the law, the rights of these people versus defenseless who stick to legitimate procedure and defend the social utility. Which right should be prioritized in this particular occasion? Thank you, my honorable friend.
Alright, so the self-defense to protect your own property is not allowed in the current jurisdiction. So how to solve those kind of inconsistency of this particular case under the general principle?
That analogy is not really analogous because it differs from the jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Sometimes it's legitimate to use lethal weaponry to defend the property. But second of all, we are talking about the unique context where the structural power imbalances between criminal organizations with legitimate use of weaponry and the defenseless personnel in a national park working in a very desperate circumstances in a very specific geographical disparity. That's the fundamental difference. Finally, about the abuse of the power, because the first speaker said they can utilize the rhetoric in order to justify their abuse. That's more likely to happen under their side of the house. Why? Because under their side of the house, the government is denying any self-defense right with proportionate weaponry, right? People think that because the government is not protecting us, we have to fight it ourselves, right? That kind of rhetoric is further abused under their side of the house, even in a less accountable way. Number two, right? Even if we concede, sometimes in some way our approach may be less accountable, but let's compare in terms of scale of the harm and the frequency, right? Civilians may be mistakenly shot by vigilantes, but that doesn't really frequently happen, right? But the illegal poaching and illegal logging is very frequently happening because there is no political will to defend these things. There is no deterrence power in the status quo. Because of this frequency and the scale of the harm, because my partner explained the collective destabilization that these criminal organizations created through human trafficking and prostitution and other illegal jobs, if we consider the scale and frequency of the harm, like a very minor case of abuse of the power and mistakenly shooting civilians, a very marginal harm. Therefore, we are happy to propose that.
Eventually, the debate falls down to two issues. Firstly, whether it's an exclusivity and whether it was solve logging, poaching existing in this context. We don't think that was solved. We might concede that the conflict might be predicted a bit more, but we don't say it's a big deal. We say it's an overriding harm, which is the second issue, or the harm of vigilantism, because we do not allow criminals to be killed just because they are criminal. These animals that might be jeopardized, they might be important, but it's not the justification to jeopardize these people who have a right to testify to the court or to at least be protected. The fact that this act was extrajudicial, the fact that this killing may occur by vigilante, the least liable actor because they're not the police, they're vigilante, that's bad. And that's how we're going to win this debate. For that, independent rebuttal to go with. Firstly, they talk about this exclusivity in information, that civilians aren't really capable of assessing what these criminal organizations are. The thing is, civilians are irrelevant because we're talking about the forest. We're talking about some area in Africa that has a lot of elephants or maybe lions, those sort of things. So the people living there, obviously indigenous people, vigilante. So it's not exclusive. It's not unknown civilians that are just randomly there that are reporting in the first place. Secondly, they talked about urgency, chimpanzee, something like that. So the thing is that, so if they want to go so then then we can protect them, then exclusivity enabled to protect these sort of things. The thing is that, so we've already characterized that this debate as a concept that it's an organized criminal activity. That these people, that to initiate these sort of organized acts, they'll have a lot of cost to hire people and send these people to these rural areas. That means that they have to gather a lot of logs or ivories or things that they want to protect. So they have to carry a lot of these sort of things. So it's going to take time to carry these retreats from the area, or they had to use the machinery to carry all these logs that could equivalent to the benefit of the drug dealing, or maybe simply pay the cost of going there. That means that if they're using machinery, that's really easy to identify, even if they're retreating. If it takes time, then police taking 7 hours wouldn't be a problem. In the best case, we might know they're like hideout. Then it's easy to identify them where they're retreating and stop them in the moment that they're retreating. They only talked about they disappear, but they don't immediately disappear. They go somewhere, and they have a lot of logs with them. Then why it's so hard to identify them in the first place? We don't think that there's exclusivity in the other ability to catch these sort of people in the first place. Thirdly, they talked about police shoot too. That's why we want to minimize extrajudicial harm. That's why we want only the most accountable people to have the right to use arms and even possess those sort of arms. And we think that was a principal concession to vigilantes being bad. And that's why the liabilities that they set on their salaries to allow people to shoot, for vigilantes to have AK-47s was principally and practically abhorrent. Fourthly, they talked about victims of vigilantes. They mischaracterize the thing. The victims are not vigilantes. It's the chimpanzees or trees that are taken by these people, taken from these forests or like somewhere in Africa. No, thank you. So, and also, we clearly told you that self-defense doesn't apply to property. Then it's not these victims that we have to talk about, these vigilantes in the first place. They said that there are some cases, but what case after all? And we're going to prove to you that we are more important in my second issue. Last, they talked about they had these policies or government has no will to stop this sort of criminal activity. Inconsistent when they say that these sort of things are huge interest for the national interest and that these people are willing to protect these sort of things, which was told by Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. They to go, and of course we told you a negative model. They can say negative model is non-existent, you know. Sure.
People who already take 7 weeks or like a week to cut down forests are already caught in the status quo, right? Please engage with people who shoot an elephant and cheat it and
your burden is to prove that some criminal organization can initiate machines, carry a certain amount of forest and turn it into log and disappear in like a few minutes or a few hours.
Sir.
How is that physically impossible? That's your burden, because they say it should take a day or an hour or a lot of hours. Police are going to find them. Vigilantes report it, then they're caught. Done. You know. First, is there an exclusivity in solvency to illegal poaching, logging? The first issue is this resource problem, that they wanted to tell us that the reallocation is possible, or that it's hard to initiate people to the big land of Africa, something like that. We say that the reallocation is irrelevant, because the only thing that they talked about was that so if there are vigilantes search these sort of thing, we can allocate police less. The thing is that vigilantes are indigenous people. They're hunting around the area. They're going around the area in the first place. So they're already going around the regions, and they're already technically searching even in the status quo, not even as vigilantes in the first place. So we think that, and more importantly, no thank you, you don't know where these criminal organizations appear. You don't know where they appear or on what time they appear. Then I'm not sure why this less investigation is any like justifiable in the first place. Then they also, then they talked about something like location hues. The thing is that important items like ivory or important forests are really only like the criminal organization want to go are concentrated, or at least it's huge enough for them to hide these sort of things or collect the benefits that they want to. That means that these things might be located in a huge places of Africa, but it's only limited after all. So the places that you have to search are limited in the first place. So we don't think that there's a limit or like so huge problem with the resource of police investigation or where we want to report or like send our aircraft, those sort of things. We think this resource thing was not inclusive. Then deterrence. The only thing they talked about was this police investigation, like network, big data, something like that. But you know, we think it's a concept of way that it's not exclusive. The fact that we have GPS, we have mobile phones, and these people are able to report in the first place. then these vigilantes, of course we want to report, even if they were not armed, because their animals, their forests are destroyed in the first place. Then we don't think there's not much of an inclusive in deterrence, because if they're able to find these sort of people, then these criminal organizations, in their analysis of cost-benefit calculus, can really do the most harshest things in these areas. Or at least if they're too armed, how are they going to stop them? Like in Mexico, police are weaker than like drug organizations, and nothing we can do. That's not exclusive. In the context that they're not too heavily armed, we can stop them. No exclusivity, no benefit. So even if we concede to a bit, because I already engaged a lot, so we may concede a bit more like saving these animals. We don't think there's justification to jeopardize people. No, thank you. We clearly told you that people have right not to be harmed if they're criminals. They have criminal rights in criminal justice system, so at least they have a right to be allowed to testify. The only thing that they want to talk about was this urgency, national interest, but they didn't tell us how it's so important as national interest. They only said interest. Why is this sort of thing so important after all? The thing is that, well, we aren't able to prevent crimes in our society. That in our neighborhood, we aren't able to prevent crime. But that is not a justification for that neighborhood to be armed and attack people. The fact that it might be urgent, especially if it's only an animal, it should not be a justification to attack these people after all. We rather told you that these people will rage for the fact that the sacred forests are attacked. They might use the guns that they have because it's only one trigger to kill these people. Then abuses will occur. Why do you give them the weapons that is the most reliable when they haven't proven so much exclusivity and insolvency? That's absurd.
Africa is big, Amazon is big, but does not necessarily mean that it's impossible for us to use the technology to correctly arrest those criminal organizations, because we've already gave you the ample analysis as to how it's not the exclusive way to crack down those kind of really huge-scale and criminal organizations' conduct. But ladies and gentlemen, those kind of the 7 hours loss versus the huge deprivation of the due process and right of a human being. So ladies and gentlemen, we've already told you how actually self-defense, using the logic of self-defense to protect your own property is not still allowed in the current society. That's why it has the motion of the BP notice 2 or 3 years ago. But ladies and gentlemen, so since there's a tiny benefit from this sort of proposition versus the huge deprivation of the due process and the important human right, and which is also sanctioned even in the case of the criminal, which is preferred, I think the latter is. So, summarizing this debate into 3 clashes. First, exclusive necessity of the motions, and secondly, how vigilance works, and thirdly, and what's the consequence provided by the both prop and op and comparison on that. So, firstly, problem. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've already told you how actually the police have willingness to enrich those kind of systems and actually to make it work, because we've already told you from the deputy leader of opposition and in which is kind of consensus. I mean, those kind of the deprivation of the asset created by the organization of crime, it will be a huge loss for the national interest, like again the tourism, or actually those kind of the deforestation material, which is already provided by the proposition side. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, we think the enrichment of the system is a reasonably logically possible scenario, precisely because the deputy leader of opposition already told you the increasing police does not necessarily mean it can be used exclusively for Amazon or Kenya. So it can be used for the kind of city crimes or whatever. So since the police has a versatile characteristic, the state has a vast incentive to increase and ameliorate those kind of procedures. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think that this policy is the necessary key to crack down the problem depicted by the proposition side. And having minimized the necessity, moving on to how vigilance works. Ladies and gentlemen, prop lacks explaining as to how actually the vigilance can be decent, because they just said they are trained, they are certified. So what? Ladies and gentlemen, we've already told you, and more analysis according to the special circumstances which can be used by the government with. So the situation is special. Those kind of the property or the interest is something really special for them. Ivory, the forest, or log, whatsoever. So that will nurture the toxic incentive to actually skip the due process and commit the lynching because they're created by the sense of vengeance. And more than that, ladies and gentlemen, what we told you as an opposition is actually giving the legal certification significantly encourage them to commit those kind of action because the police want to trust them because they want to believe the success of their own system or actually the existence of the communal complicity because they share the interest, meaning there's so huge incentive to hide those kind of incidents under the name of self-defense. Vigilantism is alive in our case. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of whether the vigilance will be the benign actor or vice actor, we think the latter is the most possible scenario in this debate. Finally, comparison between the benefit and harms. So the only benefit from their side of the house is, yeah, actually the 7 hours loss and some chimps or the logs will be deprived. Ladies and gentlemen, those kind of the 7 hours loss is not that huge compared to the deprivation of the due process or the rights of the criminals. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, in the comparison between the human rights and actually the deprivation of the property, we prefer the former, not the latter. So that's what the opposition side has continuously told you, no response from Mitsushi. So, ladies and gentlemen, given that 7 hours really mitigated benefit versus the important, the fundamental principle of the criminal justice system, or actually the beneficiaries of those kind of the criminal justice system, we think the latter is more and more important. That's why we are very proud to oppose.
Finally,
Today, the opposition team tries to run an extremely negative case because they talk about how there's other ways, there's alternative ways, and they haven't really given us an active reason to oppose the motion. And the only harm presented by that, and how vigilantes have a feeling of vengeance, or vigilantes will go crazy. They didn't respond to our point in saying that that is a harm of the status quo, the harm of illegal vigilantes and uncontrollable, unregulated vigilantes. And on to this point, they give us absolutely no response to that. So even if their harm somehow stands, that cannot be a reason to negate the motion, because that harm is not mutually exclusive, that harm exists in the status quo as well. 2 issues to sum up today's debate. 1, is there a dire necessity to does the necessity to crack down illegal poaching and illegal logging justify vigilantism? Now, what the negative team seems to concede that illegal poaching and illegal logging is a harm, but they don't really fully understand the gravity of the harm, even though my partner extensively explained on this. Because this is not just a harm on the economy or chimpanzees, such as tourism or agriculture. This is a harm to human life. This is a harm to social security. The life of personal staff in the animal preservation park is at risk. The life of indigenous people who are threatened out of their indigenous forests are at risk. This is the social security that would be undermined when gangsters and local warlords keep profiting from this illegal activity would still exist. So no, it is not just about chimpanzee, it is not just about economy, it is about human life, and it is a risk about social security. So since the harm is so severe, to the point in which we can consider this as an emergency, as an urgent crisis, that justifies vigilantism, because when you compare the harm and benefit, the benefit that we're proposing is massive. The prevention of all of those kind of harm, and the potential harm that they talked about was vigilantes might abuse these power, vigilantes might not be effective. The negative didn't explain why. The scale of these harm and the possibility of these harms simply overweighs all of the massive benefit that we have presented in today's debate. So on to the necessity. There's a dire necessity to take this policy, and they couldn't give any comprehensive reason why that is not the case. Then, the opposition whip comes up and talks about how illegal poaching takes a lot of time, illegal logging takes a lot of time, therefore it's quite easy to actually catch these people even if we don't have this policy. Then why are we having this debate in the first place? If it's very very easy to capture illegal poacher, then we don't have a problem of illegal poaching. The very fact that they have conceded that the harm of illegal poaching and illegal logging exists kind of contradict with what opposition whip was trying to say, because this is a harm which exists in the status quo and a serious harm which exists in the status quo. But second of all, like in other cases, there are many other cases in which we cannot enforce in the status quo. For example, an elephant or a rhinoceros is being illegally poached in front of you, and you try to call your local police, and it will take 9 hours until the closest local police would actually come to you and prevent the illegal poaching. They said that's a trivial case, but the problem is, in reality, that's the vast majority of case, and they couldn't engage and respond to that point at all. Finally, how do we deal with illegal poaching? Because the only harm that they presented was how, like, the feeling of vengeance will make these vigilantes crazy, and they would abuse their power. Now, again, as I said in my introduction, that's the harm of the status quo. But second of all, they weren't really listening to the model that we presented. We're going to have permits and license and regulations. So that, even if that may not be perfect, that's at least better than the status quo and not having illegal poachers. Moreover, we gave you many reasons why this is going to reduce illegal poaching activity. Deterrence, cooperation between vigilantes and the government, self-defense. And to this point, they give us absolutely no response to the actual mechanism of this proposal. So ultimately, if they have conceded the harm and they have no response to the mechanism of this policy, they have conceded to every single case that the proposition has given you. And that is why the affirmative wins today's debate.